All right, we have our third presenter here for our 2024 competition for PPE League. It is Lindenwood University near St. Louis, and they were addressed this question. Should the Central Bank of the United States, the Federal Reserve Bank, introduce a U.S. government-controlled digital currency and eliminate paper currency and coin?
All right, hi everyone. Our immediate response to this question is no, just because it is tied to the Federal Reserve Bank, which poses risk to the freedom of the economic system. But we're still open for a transition to a system of digital currency without the operating of the government as an active institution. So that would mean that we could still start off with paper money and coin, and then slowly transition to a more digitalized currency that does not entail the government.
Yeah, so the first and main reason why we don't think there should be a centralized government digital currency is, simply put, there's too much room for an abuse of power. By removing physical currency, you kind of eliminate the need for private banks because everything's digital and the government can just set up their own infrastructure for that. In addition to that, if you don't have an account with a private bank, your account is now with the government. And so any transactions that you're making can and will be monitored by the government. And that also opens the door for the government to simply just decide that you can't make a certain type of transaction. And this has already played out in some sense in Canada during the pandemic, as we saw, not the exact same situation, but we saw the government telling banks, you know, these people are protesting in this way, we need you to freeze their assets. And suddenly they don't have access to their money. And so that's one thing that we'd like to prevent here. Another reason is going along that same vein. People have a natural right to property, and labor is one's property because their body is their property. And your labor is traded for money. And then for the government to be able to decide that you cannot use your money or cannot use it in the ways that you see fit would be a violation of your natural rights to property.
The realistic point of view is that we cannot avoid digital currency. The world is turning digital day by day. We started with education during the pandemic and several other stuff like mental health, psychologists doing Zooms to people, and also doing Zooms for any other signs of like pain or fever when we couldn't go to hospitals. And after that, those things stayed and even improved. Digital currency is turning more and more big each day, and we just have to accept that idea and move forward with it. Just with the point of view of the society as the same way as the government and a global more.
And so the theory that we're presenting is we're going to create a digital currency, but like we said, we don't want to centralize by the Federal Reserve. So with this digital currency, we want private banks to be able to invest in it, and it's going to be backed for a time by the US dollar, and we're going to continue having dollars in circulation. And with that, we like to see how that kind of plays out, and if we think that our economy is able to sustain because of how big we are, if we're able to sustain switching over to a purely digital currency instead of having the physical money with us. So that's our reason for doing like a smaller version. Hyatt kind of talked about that a bit as well with in Scotland, the way they just had like their different banks had their different currencies. We're kind of proposing a similar addition to that, but with digital currency instead.
So yeah, so like Hannah and Maria and Alex and Giselle said, the digital currency controlled by the government opens up a way for them to completely monopolize the market, and it also infringes on basic human rights. But with the way of continuing digital currency without the government controlling it and them having a passive role, it reduces the idea that they could monopolize the market, and it keeps them from infringing on our rights.
So just to explicitly state it, we're open to a market of several different digital currencies, and the government's role would be to only enforce the contracts that are made between those entities, the private individual and this digital currency, if some kind of shady business happens, and then we'll just let the market play it out. You know, the ones that aren't doing so well, people will move away from them, and eventually we'll probably end up with a couple digital currencies that people are accepting and willing to use.
That's all.
All right, we have time for questions from our professor judges.
I have one.
Yes.
it seems like there were maybe a couple different proposals. One was like that there would be this transition to a digital currency. The other was that we will create a digital currency that's backed by US dollars. And then also another proposal was that there will be multiple digital currencies and we'll just let the market play out and see what works.
Correct. Okay, I can clarify all of this. So the proposal is we keep the US dollar in circulation, but we open the door for digital currencies to be introduced and used as currency. And to start, some of them could be pegged to the dollar because the dollar is recognized, it's stable, people are willing to use that, so they can migrate over to these new currencies because they know that it's backed by the dollar. And eventually, if people do move away from the dollar, then those currencies are already in use, they'll be more acceptable, and it'll be a smoother transition.
So by open the door to, do you just mean not forbid?
Correct, yes.
Okay.
But we think as digital currency becomes more popular over time, the necessity for paper currency will not be as huge as the necessity for digital currency would be. So as the necessity grows, the transition will continue on to where digital currency is more popular than paper currency.
So regarding your proposal, if the digital currency is pegged to the dollar, then why not just use the dollar?
It's to get away from the government's control of it. So, like I said, the main reason for pegging it to the dollar to begin with is just because people will recognize the trends of the dollar, and then they'll move away from the dollar. Now, at a certain point, I can't say exactly when that would be, but at a certain point, they would unpeg from the dollar, and then the main purpose of that is just to get people moving away from the dollar into the free market of currencies, where the government can't intervene as much.
Sorry. Why do you think that transition hasn't happened already? What would you say to someone who says, the dollar's been working quite well for me despite a little bit of inflation for decades and decades, to the point where other countries are begging to have something closer to the dollar, or even just outright dollarizing like Argentina's trying to do right now?
I think it's appealing to people that the paper currency can't be traced in the same way the digital currency can be, but regardless of this, the fact that paper currency can be traced, digital currency is still a necessity. I mean, think about online shopping. Think about how many people use online shopping, online services, online everything. I mean, even though there's a convenience of the paper dollar not having the government interference, digital currency is still useful and beneficial, and that's why we think the government should have a more passive role, because if we gave them more control over the digital currency, they would completely monopolize that market.
I mean, essentially, people are already talking about it, but you ask why did it not happen yet? I mean, there's so much bureaucracy, and realistically, such a transition does take time. So the proposals, the policy proposals, they do take time. So it hasn't happened yet because if you also look at globalization and currency exchange, it's not just an easy choice to say, hey, we'll adopt a digital currency. Because even now we're discussing would the government have a role, what role would that be, to what extent? So there's so many factors that right now in the system that we have and also in the global economy, it's just not feasible yet to do that. So right now we're in a period of discussion, but not of implementation.
And
So that is where the future of money lies.
And if you also take into account the history, each type of money we used along the time had a slow transition to another. Each one has its pros and cons, and bartering worked for a long time, gold worked for a long time, paper currency worked for a long time, then credit cards started to work for a long time, and it's right now transitioning to digital currency. The question is, which digital currency we wanted to transition to?
One more question. When you say that you're, what you want to do is be open to a digital currency, so, see which one ends up working. What do you see, since the dollar has worked for so long, what do you see as the main hurdles that a digital currency would have to make it over in order to overtake something like the physical dollar?
I think the first one would probably be a practical one, and that's just that people don't really know how that works or how they use it or spend it. So I think that, you know, the whole population would have to relearn essentially how to spend their money unless they dumbed it down in some kind of way for people to understand, you know. Economics is confusing enough already, and then you throw in this whole element of like how blockchain technology works and stuff, and I think people wouldn't really understand that. So there'd have to be significant efforts to educate people.
And on top of the educational aspect, it's also the access aspect. How do you get the whole of society to have access to a digital currency? Even now, we can, even if you go beyond the US, you have the developing world, which we are in trade with. So that's a really tricky question to consider, one of the main constraints talking about this.
And also, so that's why one reason why we would like to keep it backed by the U.S. currency for a time, or keeping U.S. currency, you know, the current U.S. dollar in circulation, is because it will help make people more comfortable if they know, like, hey, this digital currency is backed by something, it is backed by the dollar. But then once people are kind of comfortable with the idea and get used to having this digital currency, then you might be able to do away with the physical money and no longer having to deal with that, because people are now comfortable with it and they're used to it and they know how it works.
And the key difference being that the government isn't the one messing with the interest rates or whatever. It's the cryptocurrency. Each one itself would be able to play out as it sees fit, and the citizens will pick and choose which ones are working for them, which ones they don't like. It'll increase transparency because, you know, the ones that are doing some shady business will fail, and people will move away from them. Yes.
Quick one for clarification. You seem to be using digital currency to mean both blockchain, decentralized ledger, digital currency, and the balance sheets of our deposits on bank ledgers. Could you clarify what you all mean by digital currency? Does it mean both or one or the other?
We are mostly referring to crypto.
Okay. That is it. You guys are off